Thank you for joining us. Can I just get a show of hands just to make sure that my audio is okay, that everyone can hear me okay? You could just raise your hands. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Always want to make sure that everything's okay. Just okay. So let's get into this. And just in terms of the format, I will go through all the information. I will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to raise them as we go through. I might answer if it's a quick question that's very relevant. I might answer it on the spot. Otherwise, I'll answer it at the end of the session. So if you do have any questions, just click on the Q&A. There is a Q&A option. Yeah, on the webinar toolbar, and just put your questions there. And you're welcome to raise them as we go through, and yeah, well, I answer on the spot or at the end of the session. And of course, if you have any private questions you want to ask, you're very welcome to email them through afterwards, and we'll look at those. Obviously not tonight or the weekend, but on Monday next week. Okay, so let's get into the presentation. So I'm James. I'm from ANZ Migrate. We are a Singapore-based company that specializes in immigration to Australia and New Zealand. We were established in 2003. We have changed the name. We did start as Australia Migration Agency. Later, when we added on New Zealand, we changed to ANZ Migrate. We have a very high success rate, and that's simply because we are we are good at what we do. We know the topics very well. Myself, I'm the principal, and I started studying immigration law in 2003. I've been registered with Australia now for 21 years, and I teach the industry. So I lecture to other migration professionals. I support other migration companies and write industry articles on immigration. And in fact, I'm in Melbourne at the moment because I've been down here doing some teaching to some immigration law firms and teaching them on various immigration matters. So we are very specialized in what we do. We only do Australia and New Zealand because they are our specialty areas. That's where our expertise lies. And we're very transparent with our advice. And what I mean by that is if you're not eligible, we're going to tell you up front. We're not going to say, look, you're okay, just pay us money, we'll get you through. And I want to emphasize that because there are a lot of companies out there that are not honest with your chances. And to be fair, it is very difficult now to get general skilled migration for Australia. Overall, chances are low. There are select individuals that will have good chances, and that's something we can determine upfront. And for the majority, we are going to tell you that, unfortunately, your odds are low, or it might not even be worth trying because the odds are too low. So we are going to be very straightforward and open with that advice. Um, it's funny, I've actually been told before that I'm a negative person by some people. But it's not, I'm a negative person. We are very successful and we do find strategies for our clients if strategies exist. But often there are no chances and you're just going to waste your money. So we are going to give you that honest, open advice. And we're very proud that we do that we let you know exactly how it is. You're not going to get some fancy story from us that's not true just to try and get money from you. And that's very, very important. I started this company and I own the company based upon a desire to help people. That's where I came from this. And that comes through and with my team as well. I'm very proud of my team that we have a very high level of customer care. Okay, and that's, as I said, reflected in our success rate. I do need to update this because this is a little bit old now, but here's some statistical information from the Australian government on our visa track record, and we're very proud of that. So for myself, I've been doing immigration now since 2003. I got my Australian license in 2004. I got my New Zealand license in 2008. And again, the other two areas we specialize in. I'm trained to teach IELTS. I'm a qualified education agent counselor. I'm a member of the Migration Institute. Our company, ANZ Migrate, is now approved as a training organization for migration professionals. So we are one of only 16 companies worldwide that are authorized by the Australian government to provide immigration training to the industry, so to other migration agents. So that's something I've been doing for many years under other companies, and now I've got my own company to be certified as a training provider. So again, that represents our standing in the industry and our expertise level. I've also represented clients at tribunals, so I've sometimes challenged at the immigration department. Australia is a little bit different to Singapore, I think, in that regard, that if you get a decision that you don't think is fair or correct, there are channels to challenge that. In some cases, not always, but in some cases. And on the very rare occasions where we've had the government make a mistake, um, I've taken that to the tribunal, and I've been to the tribunal 3 times in the 20 years, and I've won each time. So, and I've also been able to resolve many issues without needing to go to a tribunal, where the department has also made mistakes or made the incorrect decision. So, when I talk about the various pathways for Australia, or some of the pathways for Australia, that is, the focus is on general skilled migration. Um, Now, that is a pathway that can lead to permanent residence, and permanent residence in Australia comes with a wide range of benefits. Now, myself, I came to Singapore, I came on an employment pass, then I got my permanent residence in Singapore. Um, and the government also offered me citizenship, which I didn't take up. I had my Australian citizenship. But permanent residence in Australia is a little bit different to Singapore. So what I've noticed in Singapore is that permanent residents get less benefits than citizens. And in fact, the difference between the benefits a permanent resident and a citizen get have just been getting wider and wider. But in Australia, permanent residents get almost the same benefits as an Australian citizen. So you get free school education, you get Australian rates at university, you get healthcare access, public healthcare, you get the welfare payments, you can sponsor relatives. Some of these do have some initial limitations. For example, the welfare benefits have a waiting period. It used to be that when you migrated to Australia and you got to Australia, you didn't have a job, the government will give you unemployment benefits. So they'd give you money every week because you don't have a job. And people would come to Australia with their permanent residence. Why would they go and look for work? The government was giving them money every week. So they decided, well, we'll put a waiting period in. So they put a waiting period of 2 years. So you can't get that benefit for the first 2 years in Australia. And that's to encourage people to work, because that's really the intent with the permanent residence. But something else there, I want to mention that the permanent residence doesn't have a requirement that you do work. So when you've got a permanent residence visa, you could work, you could study, you could sit on the beach all day and drink beer, you could start your own business, you could do nothing. So you have all those available to you. Once you've got the permanent residence, there's nothing that you must do in terms of your visa obligations. Okay. Now, these are some of the pathways that we will touch upon. And the focus will be on the general skilled migration. And the reason for that is that's a pathway for Australia for permanent residents that doesn't require a job offer. There are some pathways based upon job offers in Australia, and I'll touch upon those a little bit later. But there are a few pathways where you can get direct permanent residence without a job offer in Australia. And that's a fairly unique opportunity. I mean, you don't have that with Singapore or many other countries, but Australia still has that. But I have to say, the options under that are becoming harder and harder to obtain. But again, we can look at each case and let you know upfront whether or not there's a realistic chance to pursue that. So, and we do that as a free assessment. I mean, that's our approach here, to let you know whether or not you're eligible upfront, let you know what the costs are going to be upfront before you have to put down any money or make any decisions. And that's the way we've always approached this. So, the first one and the main one I'm going to talk about is general skilled migration. And as I said, that's a pathway that allows you to migrate to Australia without a job offer in Australia. So it looks at your skills, your qualifications, your work experience, and based upon these, it's possible to get your permanent residence in Australia. Now, there's some different streams under this, different visa types that we'll talk about, but there are some common requirements across the program. So there is a requirement to have basic English, and there's a few different tests we use for that. The most common are IELTS or PTE. And the threshold minimum requirement is IELTS 6 or PTE 50. To give you an idea, if you're not familiar, IELTS ranges from 0 to 9. So a 6 is, a fairly basic score. With PTE, it ranges from 0 to 90. So we're looking at a score of 50. So fairly low score. Now, one question that comes up a lot is, why do I have to do an English language test if I speak English, or I did my school in English? Like, we have people from Singapore that say, I shouldn't have to do an English language test because Singapore speaks English, my education's in English. I've got two answers for that. The interesting one is that actually English is not the national language of Singapore. It's actually Bahasa Malay. But that's the more quiz-oriented type question or answer. The actual other answer is that well, it's similar that there's only certain countries that are designated as English speaking, and they get waived for the English requirement. That's UK, US, Canada, New Zealand. I think they're the main countries. I think Ireland as well. Um, but every other country needs to do it. But the interesting thing is, even someone from the UK, so a British person, English person, who wants to migrate to Australia, they can get waived for the threshold requirement. But if they want points, and there's a point system where you get points for higher skills, they want to get points for the English language competency, they have to do the English language test. So the reality is that at this stage of the program, where points are so important, even someone coming from England would need to do an English language test realistically to get through the program. There is an age limit. 45 is the upper limit, so you need to be under 45, and that's for the main applicant. It's limited to a certain set of occupations, and there's an occupation list that defines the available occupations for this. There are requirements for health and character. So these are police criminal history checks. We don't need, first of all, perfect health. So we have clients that have hepatitis B, we have clients with diabetes, we have clients that have cancer before, we've had clients that have kidney issues, liver issues, partially blind, partially deaf. It's going to depend upon the individual circumstances and the degree of impact of the condition and the likely costs. Now, remember, permanent residents get free healthcare in Australia. So really what the government's doing here is looking at, well, is the expected economic benefit we're going to get from you coming to Australia, does that outweigh the healthcare costs or burden that you're going to present to us in terms of healthcare subsidies? And they benchmark this against what the average cost would be for an Australian over a 10-year period. So you don't need perfect health. And to give you an idea, the sort of conditions I mentioned before are generally not an issue. We're concerned with diseases or conditions where there's going to be very high medical care costs, and we're talking, hundreds of thousands typically or more. Or you need access to resources in limited supply. So kidney dialysis, organ transplants, blood transfusions, these kinds of things, they are going to be an issue for this. For character, generally, if you're not charged with a criminal offence where the sentence is 12 months or more, then you're going to be okay. So if you even went to prison for 10 months, your sentence was 10 months, generally not going to be an issue for this. But if it's 12 months or more, you're not generally able to get through this program. So don't need a perfectly clean record, but 12 months is the 12-month sentence is the breaking point for the program. Now, there is a point system for this. I'm not going to go through the whole point system for general skilled migration. You can look it up on the immigration website. But I just want to give you an idea of some of the factors that are considered under this. Age is one of them. Let me just get my little pointer here. Right here. So we've got the age points. You'll see that the prime group for age is from 25 to 32, so just under 33. That's the prime group, and that's where they get 30 points. We can get points for demonstrating another language other than English, and that's just everyday fluency. So just a basic level of communication in that language. We get points for work experience, for English language competency. And you'll see here for English, this is worth mentioning. Your IELTS 6 is 0 points. IELTS 7 gets you 10 points. And an IELTS 8, remember the top score is 9, the IELTS 8 gets you 20 points. So huge differences here by improving your English language scores. There are points for your partner. So if you are providing information, you want to be assessed for this pathway. Very important to provide us information for your partner if you are partnered. And we need CV for your partner. If they don't have a CV, then we need to know their education and employment history and age, of course. It's interesting now that if you're single, you get the maximum points for partnership. So you're not disadvantaged by not having a partner. And in fact, if you have a partner and the partner doesn't have good skills, then you are disadvantaged because you actually get less points than someone who is single. So in some cases, partners can weigh you down with this, but give us the information so we can look at whether or not, or at least factor in the contributions from your partner, because that's important. Points for qualifications, and we're looking at here trade certificates and diplomas. Then we look at bachelor degrees, and we look at then PhDs. There's no credit given for master's degrees. So it's bachelor and then up to PhD. Okay, now one of the important steps in the General Skilled Migration Program is called a skill assessment. And this is very early in the process, and it's where we get one of the designated occupation authorities in Australia to confirm that you meet the requirements set for that occupation. So if you're going to migrate as an accountant, one of the accounting bodies in Australia needs to look at your details and confirm that you meet the standards required for an accountant in Australia. The same if you're an engineer or an IT professional or an architect. And there are different requirements for different occupations. So for example, for accountants, we want to see a high level of English, and we want to see that your study covers a range of core accounting subjects, accounting basics, statistics, financial reporting, financial accounting, business law, a few of these basic subjects that are required for a basic knowledge of an accountant. For an engineer, we want to see an advanced diploma in engineering or a bachelor degree in engineering. And we may need to see work experience. For IT professionals, there's a range of options. And in fact, I'll show you some of these. So if we look at ICT or IT professionals, you can see some of the pathways here. And these are some of the main pathways. So for example, with a bachelor degree with an ICT major, then we need some additional work experience as well. And that can vary from 2 to 4 years, depending upon how relevant the major is to their specific occupation. So if they're a programmer, we want to see programming related subjects. If they're a system administrator, we want to see operating systems and networking and other subjects that are relevant. So depending upon that relevance, it determines how much work experience is required. You can see here ICT minor, more work experience required. If you've got a diploma, more work experience. But we also have, and you'll see it down the bottom here, we could have someone that has a qualification, so diploma or higher, so it could be a degree, that is not an ICT, but they've started working in ICT, and we can get them through by showing they've got enough years of work experience in the ICT profession. Similarly, we can also have someone that has no higher qualifications whatsoever, and we can show they've got sufficient work experience in ICT. And that's recognizing that, particularly in ICT, a lot of people do develop their skills on the job. Before I got into immigration, I worked with IBM. I worked with IBM both in Australia and in Singapore. That's in fact why I came to Singapore. And I found that once you were in IBM, your qualifications didn't matter. And there were many people in there that didn't have IT qualifications. And once you're in the company, your qualifications just weren't relevant. It was based upon your skill, your work experience, your development, um, and that's how you worked your way up. So this kind of recognizes this is very common in the IT industry for people not to have IT qualifications behind them, but they have developed their skills on the job. For business type professionals, and this would include things like marketing, advertising, sales professionals. In fact, there's a huge range in this particular grouping. Um, Management consultants, methods analysts, um, a huge range. Depending upon the occupation and the skill level for the occupation, we may want a degree. And if it's a degree that's very relevant to the occupation, then we only need 1 year of experience. But if it's a degree and it's maybe not that relevant to the occupation, then we need more work experience. So, for example, someone who's a marketing specialist, they've got a bachelor in marketing, we only need to see 1 year of work experience. If they've got a bachelor in economics, so not related to marketing, then we'll want to see usually 2 or 3 years of work experience. For them. So again, they're recognizing that for some occupations, you can develop the skills on the job, but not all. For example, a construction project manager, they do need a degree in a relevant field because the view is that you do need to have certain knowledge from university study to be able to carry out that occupation effectively. Now, there are 3 main visa types under general skilled migration. And all of the visas have a number. So they're identified by a 3-digit number. The first one, and sort of I guess if we're talking airline memberships, this would be your platinum or your gold level membership. So this is the number one. This is the top tier preferred pathway. And it's called Skilled Independent 189, Direct Permanent Residence. And the reason why it's top tier, it doesn't require any sponsorship, doesn't require any support from any government authorities in Australia. You go through on your own merits. Now, someone who is a secondary school teacher, pre-primary school teacher, a lot of science type roles, a lot of healthcare type roles, they usually have very good prospects for getting through under the 189. Then we have the 190. It's also direct PR, so it's not so bad. This would be our second tier, our gold level. The other one is platinum. And this does have an extra step. And the extra step is you do need the support of one of the regions in Australia. So Australia is divided up into various states and territories, and one of these states or territories must say, hey, you've got the skills we're looking for. We agree to support your application. And through that support, you're allowed to then apply for this visa. And once you've got that straight through, it's a permanent residence visa, just like the 189. It's just that you've got that extra step. But there are some extra benefits here because this visa also has a lot more occupations available for it. The 189 has less occupations available. So this has a lot more available to it, but it does require you to fit in with what the state or territory is looking for. Now, their support doesn't do anything else. It doesn't give you a job. It doesn't give you any money. It doesn't do anything else other than facilitate the process to be able to get that PR under the 190 pathway. Now, I do have to point out that in return for that nomination from that state or territory, you are signing a commitment to go to that state or territory when you get your PR. Now, this is where it's interesting because the PR itself doesn't limit you in any way. You can live anywhere in Australia. You can choose to work or study or run a business, do whatever you like in Australia. But you have signed a commitment to that state. So your visa lets you live anywhere, but you've made a personal commitment to go to a certain area in Australia. So Summary here is you should go to that area. But if for whatever reason, let's say you can't find a job there and you get a job elsewhere in Australia, it doesn't jeopardize your visa in any way. There's no condition that ties you to a state. It doesn't impact keeping the PR. It doesn't impact getting citizenship. You can choose to go to other areas if you wish. But we encourage you to do the right thing ethically because the state's helping you. So it's good of you in return to go to their state. And their expectation is that you would go to their state for the first 2 years in Australia. And then we have the last option. This would be your bronze or your lowest tier in your airline membership. This is the 491. Now, this gets overlooked a little bit. It's like that third child that isn't loved as much. I think it should get more love, the 491 pathway, because it's not as limiting as it first seems. Now, the 491 is not direct permanent residence. It's a temporary visa that can later go to permanent residency. And while you're on that temporary residence visa, you are limited on where you can live, work, or study in Australia. And basically, it's regional areas, so lower population areas of Australia. And it excludes Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. So you can't go to these bigger cities, but you can go to the other areas of Australia. And you are limited while you're on that temporary visa. Now, after you've held this visa for at least 3 years, and you do need to strangely have 3 tax returns in Australia during that time, you can then apply for permanent residence. And the tax returns, you can open a bank account in Australia, have a few dollars of interest, and just declare that on your tax return. So you've got a tax return there. But you'll notice that there was something left out here, and it was about staying in Australia. While you're on that temporary visa, there's actually no requirement for you to be living in Australia. You need these tax returns. That's easy. It's just processing them. But you don't actually have to live in Australia. So if you do the 491 visa and you don't want to go down to Australia to one of these regional areas, fine. You can continue living and working overseas. And after you've held the visa for 3 years, got your 3 tax returns, you apply for permanent residence. And then you can go down to Australia with a permanent residence. You haven't lived in regional areas. And once you've got the permanent residence, you can live and work anywhere in Australia. So that's why I say this needs a bit more love because it's actually not a bad option at all. Because worst case, you can look at it as just pushing back your PR for 3, 4 years rather than not having any PR because it is getting harder and harder to get PR. So I do recommend for clients, if the 491 option comes up, take it. Unless you know you've got good prospects with 190 and 189, take the 491 pathway because it's really not a bad option. You could go to Australia earlier and live and work in the regional areas, or just wait and get your PR and then go to Australia with the full PR without any limitations. So I've already talked about the 189 and 19 and 491 pathways, so I'm just going to skip through this a little bit. The 190 and the 491, which is the interesting one that I mentioned. Just one other point with the 491, although it is a temporary visa initially, and normally you don't get benefits in Australia on a temporary visa, generally under this you will get a waiver for school fees, not university, but school fees for your children. And you do get Medicare, which is the government healthcare subsidies, on this visa. You don't normally get that on a temporary visa, but you will get that on this 491 visa. So the process for general skilled migration across all these categories is the same. We need to do that skill assessment where we get that occupation assessing authority from Australia to review your background, review your skills, and confirm that you meet the occupation requirements that have been set. You'll need to do your English language test. There might be some other documents you require as well. We could then put forward what we call an expression of interest. And this puts you into the system where the government can decide whether or not they want to invite you to apply for a visa. You can't apply for the visa without that invitation. So you're essentially putting yourself into the barrel and hoping that they will pick you. Now, they do preference people by points and by the earlier date of submission. So if you've got higher points, you generally will be selected before someone with lower points. And if you're at the same points level of someone as someone else, then preference will be given to the person that had their EOI in earlier. Now, EOIs will sit in this database for 2 years and then they lapse. Now, if you get that invitation, then we apply for the visa, we do medical checks, police criminal history checks, and then wait for your permanent residence to be granted, or temporary residence, depending upon the pathway you're going under. Give you an idea what it's like in the system. This gives you an idea of how many people are in the system at each points level. So you can see that around 70 points, that's really the sort of the peak area, and then it rapidly drops off as we go up. So there's less and less people at the higher points. So depending upon the demand for your occupation, I'll give you an example. If you are a business analyst, an IT business analyst, or an IT systems analyst, you generally need 100 or more points to get through. But if you are a health professional or a scientist, you're probably going to be okay with 65 points, which is the minimum threshold that we need. So it does vary a lot depending upon the occupation. So again, let us see your information, share your details with us, a full CV for your spouse, and we can get an idea whether or not you've got a realistic chance through the process. There are also limitations on the number of places available. This is the number of places available for the states and territories to give out invitations. These numbers are reset on the 1st of July every year. So they start 1st of July. So at the moment, we're getting towards the end of the program year. So the end of June, we're end of the program year. And then these are reset on the 1st of July. So they're starting to run out now, but they'll be fully refreshed on the 1st of July. So that also means that sometimes your chances are better early in the program year because there's more places available and it becomes more competitive towards the end of the program year. But if you are starting now, it's still going to take a few months to get your skill assessment, English language test done. So you're not going to be able to start exactly on the 1st of July. So if you're starting now, depending upon your occupation, probably in about 3 or 4 months' time, you'll be able to put your EOI in. But you'd still be early in the program year, the 2025-2026 program year. So as I said, if you want to be assessed for that pathway, give us your CV. If you're partnered, we want the CV for your partner. If you don't have the CV for your partner, then we just need their employment and education history. Okay, and we're happy to assess you based upon that. Okay, so that's general skilled migration. Let's have a look at the National Innovation Visa. This is relatively new. This is a talent-based pathway. Now, the reason the government introduced this, we have the general skilled migration. The problem with general skilled migration is that people are reduced to generic roles. If you're let's say you are a programmer and you're a certain age and you've got a certain amount of experience and you've got a bachelor degree, you'll get a certain number of points. Now, if we have a programmer for, let's say, OpenAI, who was one of the key people that developed ChatGPT, and they're the same age, same number of years of experience, they're treated exactly the same. So you might have someone that's done amazing things, huge projects, significant projects, and you've got someone that just did, an accounting application for a small business. They're treated exactly the same. There's no difference. So we didn't have any way to identify the top caliber, the top tier talent. And that's where the National Innovation Visa comes in. So it's designed to identify the people that have top tier skills and give them an express pathway to permanent residency. And we do look at people in 4 areas. We have academia and research, professionals, people in the arts, and people in sports. So you could be in any of these 4 areas, but we need to see someone who has really excelled in these areas. And there are what we call indicators that we look for. And the indicators include top of field awards. Now, remember too that these things are ideal. We have many clients that don't quite meet these, but still get through because, they are in the right direction. So if you look at this and you see Nobel Prize, well, not everyone's going to have that, or Olympic gold medal. Look, if you had an Olympic silver medal or Olympic bronze medal, I can still do this. But even if you are, not in the Olympic level, but you are in the national sports team, it's still worth looking at this. We look for national research grants, for academics, of course, research grants and publications in top-tier journals. For academics, we look at the H index rating, which is it's a reference that's used for um, their publications and how often they're cited. So basically, it's kind of like a reputation, essentially, in the academic circles. We look at people that have been speaking at conferences, now, ideally keynote roles, so the headline speech for an industry event. But we have had people get through that just give normal speeches, speaking engagements at industry events. Um, for people that have a high salary, and the benchmark for that is 175,000 Australian dollars equivalent. That's another indicator. And people that have intellectual property, such as patents. And it might be the patent is under their name, or it might be that they can show that they were one of the key contributors towards developing a patent. So sometimes we have people that work in a company, and the company's got the patent, but we can show that they were one of the key people that developed the ideas in that patent. So these are the kinds of factors we look for. If you think that you might be suitable for these, reach out to us. There is also consideration given for people that are recent PhD graduates, and that's within the first 3 years. So they might not have these yet, but their research is interesting and relevant to Australia, then they could also be considered under this pathway. There's also preference given, and it's done through prioritization for certain fields. And you can see here the top tier ones, which are critical technologies, which are things like AI, robotics, quantum computing, biotech, cyber technologies, health industries. That's interesting. It's not health, it is health industries. So it is the commercial industrial side of health. So it's not, well, this person's a top surgeon. No, but this person developed technology that is being used in medicine, or develop new medications, or develop new ways of doing things in the health industry. And renewables and low emission technologies. These are the top tier. So anyone in these fields is the highest priority, and they've got a better chance of getting through the program because they're given consideration first before anyone else. And then the second tier, which is still prioritized, but not as high as the first tier, are all these areas. So agritech, defense, space technology, education, fintech, financial services, infrastructure development, and resources. So the process for the National Innovation Process, there is no occupation assessment. So we put together a small portfolio, we submit that to the government and wait and see if they will invite you based upon that. And there's no answer. It's you get picked up and given a yes, or it just sits there and waits. And ultimately, if nothing happens, then you don't get any invitation. So you don't get a no, yes, you just get a yes if it's selected. So again, you're waiting to see if you are selected. We can give you an indication of whether or not you're likely to be able to get through this program. So again, share your information with us and we can make a determination and let you know up front whether or not it's worthwhile pursuing this. So let's look at some of the other options available to you to get permanent residency in Australia. Now, we do have study pathways. You can study in Australia as an overseas student. And if you've done at least 2 years of study in Australia, there are options to get an open work visa after your study. So you're able to get a work visa that is going to let you work for any employer in Australia. And that could be for 2 to 4 years after your study. So you're able to go to Australia and you can then stay on and work with that. One of the limitations, though, the government did last year is they have put an age restriction around this of 35. So they've age capped it. There are some exemptions for that. People from Hong Kong get an exemption from that age limit, but most countries will be limited to that 35 age cap, unfortunately. Students can work while they do study, so they can work part-time, which is up to 48 hours per fortnight. Once they finish their study and they go into that post-study work visa, they've got full-time work rights. You can also bring family along on a student visa. And in fact, we do see some people, particularly older couples, um, that look at the master's degree. And the reason why they look at the master's degree is if one of the couple studies a master's degree, the partner gets full-time work rights. So one person can study a master's degree, the other person can go along and get full-time work rights, open work rights, so they can work for any employer. And because they're down there working with the employer, then they can build a relationship with the employer, and then they can either seek general skilled migration, because they're in Australia, the chances are increased for getting that state nomination, or they could talk to the employer about the employer sponsoring them for a work visa. And if they go on a work visa, that can lead to permanent residency after a while. And I'll just touch briefly upon a few of the other visas. I'm not going to go through in more detail, but I'll just touch upon them. For the employer sponsorship that I was just talking about, um, there are pathways both directly to PR or temporary residence first, and after 2 years, then applying for permanent residency. You do need at least 1 year of experience in your occupation to be sponsored for that occupation in Australia. So if you want to be sponsored, a company wants to sponsor you as a marketing professional, you need to show you've got at least 1 year of working as a marketing professional first. So there are pathways under employer sponsorship. It can be a bit hard sometimes getting an employer in Australia to hire you from overseas. As I said, one option for that is your spouse studying a master's degree, you tag along, you've got open work rights, you can start working with a company and build that relationship and then seek their sponsorship to stay on with an employer-sponsored visa. There are also pathways for family sponsorship. So if you do get to Australia and you want to help your parents migrate, there are limited options to help other family members. So cousins, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, um, there even grandchildren actually. There can be pathways for them, but they are based upon variations of the general skilled, and it can be difficult to get through under that. But there are specific pathways for children, dependent children, which can be students up to the age of 25, and parents. Now, actually, I have got on here business innovation and investment. I'm going to put a big line through that. So we did have business and investment migration programs for Australia up to effectively 2023, officially up to 2024, but in reality up to 2023. They were stopped by the current government. Now, we had a national election on May the 3rd. The opposition was talking about bringing back investment migration to Australia. Unfortunately, they didn't get back in, or fortunately, depending upon which side you lean. So the current government is continuing, and they have said no, they're not going to bring back business or investment migration. So we don't have any investment migration pathways for Australia. We do for New Zealand, but not for Australia, and none for the foreseeable future in Australia, given the position of the current government. It will be 4 years before there's another election and a possibility of another government coming into power. Now, once you've got your permanent residence, there's a little bit of confusion here because permanent residence isn't permanent, despite the name. And what I mean by that is your permanent residence lets you stay in Australia permanently or indefinitely, as we say. So you can permanently reside in Australia. But your travel rights, this is the right to leave Australia and come back as a permanent resident. That is not permanent, that is not indefinite. And that is initially limited to 5 years, meaning that after 5 years, if you leave Australia and you haven't taken any steps to extend this travel facility, your PR will cease because you can no longer travel to Australia as a permanent resident. Now, to extend those travel rights, there are several ways to do that. The first way is simply be in Australia for 2 years cumulatively. Out of the last 5 years as a permanent resident, you can extend for a further 5 years. So that could be a few trips here and there that add up to 2 years in Australia. Doesn't matter if you work, doesn't matter what you do, as long as you physically are in the country for a total of 2 years. If you don't meet that, then there are options to renew based upon connections to Australia. It could be through family, it could be cultural connections, employment, business. There's a variety of options available here. There are possibilities to do this. For example, we have been successful in helping people that are running a business in Singapore where they import Australian products, and we've been able to renew on that basis. And typically, it doesn't have to be a high amount. So I've done cases where it's around 40,000 a year worth of products, and they've got through this. I've also done this where people have been employed overseas, and we've argued that it's better for them to stay overseas at the moment to develop their skills to bring back to Australia to potentially benefit Australia in the future, so that they've got good career opportunities now and they shouldn't be wasted. And it's good for Australia for them to stay overseas and develop their skills, because that will bring more value to Australia when they come to Australia later on. And we've been successful doing that in many cases as well. And it's also possible to do this if you're the member of the family unit of someone else who's got an RRV. RRV is what we call the renewal of the permanent visa, resident return visa. What this means is husband and wife, if the husband meets the requirements to renew, the wife can renew and the kids can renew as well, or vice versa. So might be the husband's in Singapore, the wife goes down to Australia, has some holidays in Australia, adds up 2 years of stay in Australia. She can renew for another 5 years. Then the husband can renew based upon the relationship with the wife and the children as well, or vice versa. So there's a lot of flexibility here. We have also been successful helping people that have had a permanent residence visa that has ceased a long time ago. So my record at the moment is around 20 years. So someone whose PR ceased around 20 years ago. And I've had 3 cases recently where I've helped them obtain their PR again after a very long time. Now, it can be difficult. It does depend upon the situation. Some people might be eligible now. Some people might not be eligible, or they might be eligible with a strategy they need to put into play first before they can apply. So that, again, that's something we can discuss depending upon your situation. If you are looking at citizenship in Australia, that does require 4 years to pass and at least 3 years of physical presence in Australia, including at least 1 year of that holding the permanent residence visa. So you can include time on temporary visas. So if you're studying in Australia, for example, and then you get your permanent residence, you don't have to wait another year. And provided you've had 4 years in Australia, then you can apply for permanent residency. Sorry, citizenship. Um, there is also a strong relationship between Australia and New Zealand. So anyone holding a permanent residence visa in Australia or Australian citizenship is entitled to a residence visa in New Zealand, and you get that simply on arrival at the New Zealand airport. So very, very nice benefit and a key relationship between Australia and New Zealand. However, it is not bilateral. Australian citizens and permanent residents can go to New Zealand. But from the reverse, from the New Zealand side, only New Zealand citizens get access to Australia. New Zealand permanent residents do not get any special access rights to Australia, unfortunately. And since we're on the topic of New Zealand, I'm just going to mention a few of the options available for New Zealand, just in case you're wondering about that. New Zealand does have a skilled migration program, but all of the skilled migration pathways for New Zealand start with a job offer first. So you must have a job offer first if you want to look at skilled migration for New Zealand. There are study pathways for New Zealand with post-study work visas available for New Zealand as well. They don't have that 35 age limit, and they don't also require a minimum of 2 years study like Australia does. So you could do 6 months of study in New Zealand and get a 6-month work visa after that, for example. We have an entrepreneur visa for New Zealand, which we don't have for Australia. There are some challenges with that. So if it's something that you're interested in, we need to have a discussion, because there are some challenges, but it is possible to do this. There is an investment migration pathway for New Zealand, starts at 5 million New Zealand dollars, vested for 3 years. We also have an investment retirement visa for New Zealand based upon a 750k New Zealand dollar investment. Australia has no retirement visa. There is a legacy one, but that's only available for people that were on retirement visas in the past. If you are new to Australia, there is no retirement visa available, unfortunately. But New Zealand does have an option for that. Okay, so we went through quite a lot there. If you're interested in any of these, reach out to us, send us your CV. If you're partnered, send the resume or CV for your spouse. We'll be able to assess that and let you know what your options are. So thank you very much, everyone. If anyone's got any questions, you're more than welcome to raise them. We've got quite a few people in, but I've had no questions. So that either means everyone's asleep or I've covered everything so well that you don't have any questions to ask. Hopefully it's a second case. So I will just pause for a moment to see if anyone has any questions, which is great. I mean, oh, we've got a question. Okay. Let me just answer the question. And the question is for a HR advisor for skill assessment through VetAssess, and that's the the Occupation Assessment Authority for a HR advisor. Is it required to submit the organisation chart? Also, does VetAssess look into reporting lines for approval or just the responsibilities? Okay, good question. So first of all, for management occupations, you need for VetAssess, you do need an organisation chart. For roles like HR advisor, I can't recall off the top of my head if you need an organization chart, but I believe you probably would. Even if it's not mandatory, it would be good to include. And the reason is to really support that you are in a HR advisor role. So a HR advisor role would be someone working in the HR department, reporting to the HR manager that would have responsibility for HR functions. And the reason why you want to do that is to show that you're not just a lower level admin, HR admin person, but you are someone responsible for interviewing, for implementing or supporting the HR policies, for doing training, skill development assessments, understanding the hiring needs, these kinds of things. You wouldn't be developing policies because that's a HR manager, but you'd be expected to do these kinds of range of um, responsibilities. So we would look for an org chart that shows you reporting to the HR manager, and possibly might be admin people under you. They might not be, but we want to see that if so. For example, we saw the organization chart. It's HR manager, then HR staff, and then you're under the HR staff. Unless it was a very large organization, then that probably wouldn't support you being a HR advisor. Now, the second part for the organization chart, do we look at reporting lines? Yes, we're looking not for the responsibilities generally, we look for the functional role names, so like HR manager, and the reporting lines to understand the layout and see that it really makes sense to support the position that you are doing. And the questions are starting to come in, which is good. So someone's asked kids benefits for 189, 190, and 491. Okay, so for all of them, generally there will be free school education, so you won't pay for public schools. Um, for the 189 and 190, you will get local rates at university. You'll also be entitled to childcare supplements, payments, child support payments from the government, um, paid parental leave. Um, so basically all the benefits, healthcare and everything. For the 491, it's really only going to be the school fees waived, so free education and healthcare. Okay, you won't get the welfare payments, supporting parent payments, these kinds of things for the 491. Okay, so that's done. Someone's asked for solar sales engineers, what are your suggestions? Interesting. One of the problems we face is our database of occupations that are used in the system are very out of date. I used to be an IT project manager. When I started doing this, I was IT project manager before at IBM. When I started doing this, we didn't have IT project managers as an occupation in the database. That was only added, I think, around 2012. We still don't have a lot of occupations we need. So solar sales engineers. So if you are very technical, so you're out there helping your clients solve technical issues, so you're really doing engineering type work, then we could put you as an engineer. But if you're really just sales oriented, it's going to be a lot harder. There are very limited opportunities for sales roles. A few technical sales people we can get through, but there probably isn't great prospects if you're just sales only, um, unfortunately. But if you graduate as an engineer, depending upon the country you came from, and the agreements that are in place, because there are intercountry agreements. For example, we call it the Washington Accord. So Singapore is a signatory for that now. Malaysia is. India now is. And if you've got degrees that are covered by this agreement, then you automatically can get that skill assessment as an engineer. And then we might still be able to consider you as a sales engineer under that, depending upon what you do. So a bit of discussion required there, but that's giving you a little bit of background for that. Let me just mark that. And it's just me tonight. I'm giving my staff Friday night off. So I'm an Australian boss, so my staff don't have to stay back. So they get tonight off. So it's just me here by myself tonight. Is the nursing profession still in high demand in Australia? What are some cities you recommend to apply for the Visa 190? Do you have a chance? Nurses are, but there is a bit of a queue building. But at the same time, requirements for nursing assessments are also changing and getting a little bit harder. So yes, but we are seeing the points increase a little bit for nurses. When we say which cities would we recommend to apply, well, usually we will apply for multiple locations. And yeah, we would probably spread across all of them. Some of the states and territories we can see up front, like for example, ACT Canberra, which is one of the smaller ones, they publish their selection criteria and they're very transparent with that. So we can really see whether or not it's worthwhile. But others like Victoria, which is where Melbourne is, New South Wales, where Sydney is, Western Australia, where Perth is, we don't know. We know broadly what they're looking for. And we've got a bit of an idea of the history, but we'd still just put you forward to see. We wouldn't know up front whether or not you've got a realistic chance. Well, we know whether you've got a realistic chance, but we won't know whether you've got a strong chance. But generally, nurses, yep, are in good demand. I'd have to look at your situation, look at the points. One of the things we do, we do have access to statistical information, so we can see the history of selections at different points levels for different occupations, different states. So we can see what's going on, and we can also see your current competition to know where you stand against that. So we can give you a fairly good idea of where you sit and what your chances are like. Okay, let me see. Now, question: how fast can you get a job in Australia once your PR is approved? How long is a piece of string? I don't know. It really depends. Now, I do I guess I'm a little bit more pessimistic here. I mean, you are coming to a new country, you don't have local work experience, um, you might not be familiar with the culture. You should allow longer rather than shorter. So have strong savings behind you. It's probably going to take you a few months at least. You might not find a job even in the first few months. It also depends where you're going. Some states, like South Australia, they have welcoming support. They have introduction networking events. It also depends where you go, depends what industry you're in. Some industries are very transferable. ICT, very, very transferable. Things like teaching, um, that might not be as transferable. Um, it really depends. Or accounting, might not be as transferable, or some sort of business type service. But IT engineering, they tend to be very transferable, where they can just plug you straight in. So it will depend on lots of things. You might also want to, if you're a couple, you might want to take a balanced approach where one of you continues working overseas, one of you goes down there to look for work. But I think a key thing here is you really should be down there. It's very hard to find the jobs remotely. You really need to be down there, seeing people face to face, and try and get some local work experience if you can. So someone currently studying in New Zealand, Masters or Professional Accounting, will be completing November 2025. Best time to apply for Australia. Now, the bad news is it's very, very hard for accountants. Very hard. And you're having a master's in accounting doesn't do anything on the migration side to help you out. Unless, of course, that's how you become qualified as an accountant because your degree is not in accounting. But just having a master's degree by itself doesn't do anything for you for the migration process. I'm going to say it's almost impossible for most people to migrate as an accountant. So your best prospects probably to stay on in New Zealand, get your permanent residency and citizenship later in New Zealand, and then use that to go to Australia, or get local work experience in New Zealand, and then seek an employer sponsorship option for Australia after you've got 1 year of work experience as an accountant. Because you're going to have work experiences very similar to Australia, so that should make it easier to apply for work in Australia. Okay, maybe not the answer you want, but it's the answer what you need to hear. Is there an age limit for Australian PR to apply for Australian citizenship? No, there isn't. Okay, someone's asked, I'm confused about the 3 occupations for ACS. My roles are quite diverse in my job. Okay, so Australian Computer Society is the assessing authority. I'm just going to have a drink. Now, Australian Computer Society is the assessing authority for ICT occupations. And they have quite interestingly come up with an option where you don't just have to get assessed for one occupation, you can nominate up to 3 occupations to be assessed for. But you do have to have relevant experience for these 3 occupations. So you might not be suitable for 3 occupations. It depends on the relevance of your tasks and how relevant they are. So if there's enough relevance for 3 occupations, then you can get an outcome with 3 occupations. For example, someone doing project management, business analyst, systems analyst, there's probably a strong overlap with a lot of their duties, requirements analysis, planning, understanding needs. That's a requirements analysis. There's a lot of similar tasks across these 3. But you've got someone that is a programmer, and then you've got someone that is maybe an ICT project manager, and then you've got someone that is a network administrator. These are quite different occupations. So you're not likely to have a reference letter showing your duties and experience that would be closely related to each of these 3. So you probably wouldn't be able to choose 3 in that case. So you don't have to have 3, but the option is to have up to 3. You need at least 1, obviously. If you've got 3, then it means you can put 3 separate expressions of interest in and be considered for the 3 different pathways, which can potentially improve your chances. I think it's back to our HR advisor. I don't report to HR manager director directly, but to the business head or project manager, and a dotted line report to HR director. It may be okay. I mean, in that case, you probably want to make it clear what the responsibilities are of these different roles so that we can see that you really are doing the HR role. I mean, if, for example, you're the only person under the HR director, doing HR advisor, or there's other people at the same level, same group, and same tier as you, then it would probably make sense. I was just talking about a very conventional role, but obviously a lot of companies do vary. Some are very flat, some are very hierarchical. So it does vary, but it's got to make sense essentially. So it could be different information. So you need to do what's appropriate, and you need to strategize around this. So that's something we'd work with our clients and look at what's appropriate to really position them well for this. Someone's asked, how long applying as a Singaporean citizen after submitting will the EOI take to be issued? Now, there's no difference by nationality here. Australia does not have quotas by country. It does not prioritize by country. So there's no difference. The fact you're a Singaporean or a Malaysian or from Vietnam or Indonesia, same processing time. So how long does it take for the EOI take to be issued roughly after skill assessment? Well, skill assessments typically take somewhere between 2 to 4 months, depending upon the assessing authority. Some can be longer. And you apply for the EOI once you've got that back and you've got your English language test. And then how long before you get the invitation? Who knows? Some people don't get an invitation. Some people get it after a month. Some might get it after 6 or 12 months. It depends. Lots of factors there. Current processing time for 189 and 190 for nurses. There is prioritization in the processing for healthcare occupations. Healthcare and education get priority processing. I don't know off the top of my head. Probably around 6 to 12 months at a guess. But I have to look at the data. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's probably around 6 to 12 months. It's not fast. But something interesting, if you've applied for a 190, 190, 491, we can arrange for what's called a bridging visa. So it's a visa that can let you go to Australia, live in Australia, and work while your visa is being processed. Now, there is a catch here. You would normally go to Australia on a visitor visa first, and that normally allows 3 months stay. You can't work in that 3 months. But after that 3 months, then you transition to a bridging visa with work rights, and you can continue to stay on in Australia and work in Australia until your 189, 190, 491 is granted. So 3 months holiday, essentially, and then you can work in Australia if you wanted to go down there earlier. I know it's not ideal, but that option is available. It's better than not having any option to work at all before your visa is granted. Someone asked, what category does finance and accounting professionals tier one, two, three? I'm not sure what you're referring to. If you're referring to National Innovation Visa, there's only tiers one and two. So I'm not sure what you're referring to with the tiers one, two, three. We don't have a tier system for general skilled migration. So not sure there. Flick me an email with your question. Happy to answer. Lots of questions coming in. So let's see. Thanks for the webinar. Interior designer with a BA, 1 year work experience. Are there states who need people in that kind of role? We have had interior designers go through. So yeah, there is some demand. It's not, obviously as high as some occupations, but there is some demand for that. So it's worth looking into and finding out what your options are. So do contact us and we can check that out. Solar engineer again. Are companies hiring from Singapore, they're favorable to locals? Always favorable to locals. We do have some people that get jobs from overseas, but it's hard to find the employer that's willing and able to hire from overseas. And even if you've got the work rights, it's still, look, if I'm an employer in Australia and I've got two candidates, one who I can see face to face, one who's overseas, and I know that they've got to move and they've got, there's going to be hassles there because they can't start straight away. I'm going to go for the less complicated option, realistically. So I always think it's better to be down there. But I can't comment on the hiring companies. My specialization is migration. I can't speak for the companies down there. But there are opportunities, but it is hard to find. If you're looking for companies to sponsor you, it's hard to find those companies. There are companies that sponsor because there's a lot of people on employer-sponsored visas. But when you just contact companies straight off, majority are just going to say, no, we don't want to sponsor from overseas because there's a lot of costs involved with sponsoring someone from overseas. Someone's asked how, and there were no questions before, and then there's all these questions. So that is good. May I know roughly how much do we need to set aside if we're planning to start a new life for a family of 5? How long is a piece of string again? Well, it really depends. But I can tell you an easy way to kind of get a rough estimate. Go to some of the university websites, and they will have cost of living guides for overseas students. So you go to like RMIT, University of Melbourne, University of Sydney, and they'll have information on their website for students on estimating the cost of living, like how much they should plan for bills, for rent, and so on. And this is going to be student lifestyle, so very, very basic lifestyle. So if you're looking at very minimal, frugal lifestyle, that can be a good indication. Probably a family of 5, very, very basic lifestyle in Australia, probably 30, 40,000 a year, maybe. That's just a real guess. Um, it's it's not cheap to live in Australia, and many things are more expensive than, let's say, Singapore. But also, your salary is quite often higher than Singapore, and your work hours are definitely less. I can say that. Like my staff, they're not working now. Okay, let's answer. Let's close that. Okay, and then someone asking about marketing communication specialists. Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard for marketing communications to get through. Um, it's yeah, it's hard. But look, send us your resume. We don't charge for initial assessment. We can look at that and let you know. Maybe you're an exception. Maybe you've got very high points, or maybe we can see there's a particular option for you. But generally, for marketing, it's very hard. Okay. Look, thank you very much. I'm going to stop it there, and I've covered all the questions. Any other questions, you're welcome to email us, same email address you registered. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I look forward to speaking to you in the future and maybe seeing you in Australia one day. Take care, everyone. And also, don't forget, we can also help out with New Zealand. This focus was on Australia, but we also do New Zealand migration, and we can certainly help you with that as well. So if you want to ask about both options, you're certainly welcome to do so. We also do education. So we do education placement and enrollment. And one of the add-ons, there are many education agencies. They can certainly enroll you, which we can do as well. But we can also advise you on what's likely to lead to migration outcomes. Whereas an education agency just covers the education. So we can cover both the education and also give you immigration advice and give you an idea about direction to head in if you want to maximize your chances for permanent residency when you finish your study. So there's a extra value add there. Okay, take care, everyone, and have a good weekend. Good night.